I have to what to stay on your planet. The alien girl was not ready. Ryland's shoulder smashes against the curved metal bulkhead, a grunt of exertion forced through clenched teeth. Sparks shower around him as blaster fire chews at the corridor walls, leaving molten gashes in the steel. A handful of soldiers in charcoal grey uniforms press forward with lethal intent, their rifles set to lethal discharge. He clamps one hand around the grip of his own weapon, a battered pulse, carbine that hums with fading energy. Grit coats his throat, each breath ragged. He's running dangerously low on ammunition, a reality that only tightens the coil of tension in his gut. He swings himself around the corner, the muscles in his arms screaming in protest as he levels the carbine and squeezes off 3 short bursts. The pulses streak neon blue across the tight space. One soldier crumples instantly, the impact knocking him back into his comrades. Ryland spots a momentary opening. Without a second of hesitation, he lunges forward. He covers the distance. In 3 bounding steps, colliding into another attacker with the force of a storm. The soldier's helmet snaps back from the blow. Ryland cracks his knuckles just before his fist pistons forward, hooking across the soldier's jaw. The dull crack reverberates through the corridor. He's always had that habit, the quick flex of his fingers, a prelude to violence. It's a signature that's followed him across countless battlefields. A shrill war cry splits the cacophony. Ryland ducks reflexively, expecting more gunfire, but something else streaks overhead, a flash of gleaming metal. Before he fully registers the shape, he hears the distinct hum of alien energy. It's not a technology he's familiar with. The blade arcs viciously, dissecting a soldier's weapon in 2 before carving a sizzling line across his chest. The soldier drops, and the blade's wielder lands gracefully, black hair cascading around pointed ears that glitter with delicate metallic etchings. She whips her head around, eyes shifting in color from a sharp cyan to something flickering between violet and a deep electric hue. There is an otherworldly grace in her movements, each step too fluid, each breath unnervingly controlled. He's been told about her species, Sarika. She is reputed to be an infiltration specialist, lethal in close combat, rumored to carry a voice that resonates at a frequency that can scramble a man's mind. Ryland has never fought alongside one of her kind before, but right now, he doesn't have time to marvel at the lithe ferocity. Another barrage of pulsefire scorches the walls. One stray bolt nearly grazes his cheek, and he hisses, forced to press himself flat against the corridor. Sarika moves with snake-like elegance, flipping out of the bolt's path. Her hair fans out behind her, revealing elongated ears carved with intricate alien script. There's a fleeting moment where Ryland's eyes lock with hers, that color shift intensifying, her lips parted in exertion. He notices a faint luminescence racing across the column of her throat, trailing over the ridges of her collarbone. In another beat, she lunges into the fray, her energy blade whirling with lethal purpose. Ryland exhales sharply, picks off another soldier with a precise shot, then shoulders into position beside her. They both see the last 2 soldiers, equally battered and now scrambling for cover. Ryland surges forward and rips a fallen soldier's shock baton free from limp fingers. He tosses it to his left hand and, feeling the weight, leaps forward to finish the fight. With one savage swipe, Sarika's blade disarms a soldier. Ryland's baton cracks into the other's helmet, sending him sprawling. The corridor is suddenly still, except for the hiss of molten metal and the smell of scorched fabric and ozone. Sarika stands in the flicker of emergency lights. Her chest rises and falls with each ragged breath. Ryland's gaze lingers on the subtle way her skin's luminescent markings pulse in time with her heartbeat. It's a mesmerizing sight, an odd aesthetic of pulsing neon veins beneath pearlescent skin. But her stance is coiled, prepared for immediate violence if needed. He'd be a fool to let down his guard around her. He doesn't trust easily, and definitely not some alien infiltration specialist he's never met before. But here they are, the corridor littered with unconscious or dead soldiers who had tried to gun them down. He nods once, a silent show of acknowledgement, and lifts his carbine. The power reading flickers in the red, nearly spent. He checks the weapon's gauge, scowling. "Too many of them," he mutters. His voice is a low rumble, and tension laces each syllable. He glances at Sarika from beneath the messy strands of hair that fall over his forehead. She's still, poised with her blade. A subtle change in her eyes reveals curiosity or scrutiny, maybe both. She doesn't respond, instead flicking the blade off with a deft motion. The hum dies, leaving an oddly hollow silence. Her alien ears shift, picking up the distant clank of reinforcements scurrying in the next corridor. Ryland sets his jaw. "If we don't move, we'll be caged in here." He doesn't elaborate, but her narrowing eyes suggest she understands. They're pinned in a corridor with no quick exit, no reinforcements of their own, and dwindling supplies. He gestures for her to follow and begins moving at a brisk jog. The corridor twists sharply, leading to a set of pressurized doors. At the far end, there's a flickering strobe light, a sign that the ship they're on is badly damaged. Sparks fizz from a control panel. He punches a code, the memory of infiltration protocols from his old life still fresh. But the door remains stubbornly locked, the mechanism jammed. Sarika steps forward, placing a delicate hand on the panel. Her skin flashes with an intense cerulean glow as she manipulates a small multi-tool from her belt. The device hums in harmony with her, as if feeding off her alien physiology. Rylan watches, brow furrowing, uncertain. Then the door slides open with a groan of metal. They slip through. The moment they emerge on the other side, Rylan hears distant shouting. He signals for silence, pressing his back to the wall. Sarika mirrors him on the opposite side, her ears slightly angled, listening. Rylan counts footsteps. Too many. Another security squad is searching the corridor adjacent to them. He motions for her to head down a side hatch, but she shakes her head, pointing in the direction of a docking bay symbol. They exchange a brief glare, neither wanting to give up control. Finally, Sarika's posture tenses, her eyes flickering with exasperation, and she pivots on her heel. In silence, she leads him in that direction. They slip past a chaotic tangle of overhead wires and approach a half-open door. Smoke seeps through the gap. Inside is a small cargo bay. An explosion must have rocked this section earlier because crates and canisters are strewn everywhere. The floor is pitted with blast marks. The overhead lights flicker. Hunched near a cluster of overturned containers are 3 more soldiers. They haven't noticed Rylan and Sarika yet, too preoccupied with rummaging for something. Rylan's pulse quickens. He glances at Sarika, who is already crouched. Her eyes shift from violet to a deep emerald, focusing with predatory intent. A trembling neon line courses across her arms. She's preparing for a fight. He gestures. "I'll take the one on the left. You handle the other 2. She responds with a curt nod. A single breath passes. Then they surge forward as one. Rylan leaps behind the nearest crate, using the vantage to line up a precise shot. His carbine whines, firing a bolt that downs the first soldier instantly. Sarika moves like a living blade, sliding under a hail of desperate gunfire. She closes the distance in a heartbeat. Her energy blade ignites with a hiss. The soldier tries to scream, but she silences him with a diagonal slash that short-circuits his neural implants. The final soldier attempts to turn tail and run, but Rylan vaults over a crate, intercepts him, and smashes the butt of his gun into the soldier's chest. The man staggers, gasping. Sarika swings in, finishing him with a swift strike. By the time the soldier hits the deck, there's no one left to fight. Their chests heave in unison, a synchronized rhythm under the stuttering lights. They exchange, a wordless look, an unspoken acknowledgement that they work uncannily well together for 2 strangers from opposing worlds. Yet tension lingers. Neither trusts the other. Attraction crackles unbidden beneath that tension. But they've barely got the chance to notice it before more pressing survival concerns push forward. Rylan rifles through the scattered supplies, finally finding a half-charged power cell that might fit his carbine. He grunts in triumph and slams it into place. Sarika pushes a massive crate aside with surprising strength, revealing an access hatch in the floor. She motions for him to check it. He lifts the hatch. Stale air whooshes. Up, it leads into an underdeck maintenance tunnel. A cramped space, but likely their best chance for avoiding the next wave of security teams. They slip into the tunnel. It's a tight fit, especially for Rylan's broad frame. The flickering overhead luminescence in her skin periodically lights the darkness. She's in front, guiding them. Her hips brush against the narrow walls, the curve of her back flexing as she steadies herself. Rylan tries not to notice the small, mesmerizing swirls of color that trace her body with every subtle shift. He focuses on the path, on the hushed scrape of metal and the dull throbbing in his shoulders. At last they emerge in a partially collapsed corridor near the docking bay. The large blast doors stand ominously sealed. Smoke hangs thick, obscuring the overhead lights, But from here, they can glimpse the exterior beyond the porthole. Stars swirling in an endless void, the vessel drifting dangerously close to a planet's atmosphere. Alarms wail in the distance. The entire ship is on the brink of catastrophic failure. She steps forward, hands splaying across the door's manual release. Ryland stands at her side, weapon raised. The door groans open a few centimeters, letting them see into the hangar. There's a sleek craft anchored on the far side. A small, fast-looking shuttle that might be their ticket out. But more soldiers are scattered about, apparently preparing for departure themselves. Ryland counts them quickly. 6, maybe 7, all heavily armed. One officer in a more ornate uniform stands near a data console, barking orders. Ryland suspects these men are the final security detail, preparing to escape. He and Sarika exchange another quick look. He cracks his knuckles again, once, twice. Like a reflex, Sarika's lips part, and that purring undertone in her voice raises goosebumps on his arms. "We can't sneak past them," she murmurs softly, her voice carrying that eerie resonance. "We have to fight." Ryland nods. "Wait for my signal. We do this fast." They wait a long, tense moment as one soldier walks too close to their position, almost discovering them. The soldier turns away at the last second, stepping toward the others. Ryland signals with a sharp flick of his wrist, and they erupt out of cover in a coordinated blitz. Ryland opens fire first, taking down 2 men in quick succession with pinpoint bursts. Sarika leaps into a flanking maneuver, rolling beneath a cargo loader before springing up behind an unsuspecting target. Her blade slices through rifle barrels, limbs, and armor with surgical precision. Sparks dance in the air, shouts fill the hangar. The remaining soldiers scramble for cover. One lobs a plasma grenade. Ryland has just enough time to dive behind a crate, dragging Sarika with him, the scorching blast rattling the entire space and leaving his ears ringing. He emerges from cover to find one soldier trying to flank him. The man's rifle roars. Ryland deflects just enough to avoid a direct hit, though his shoulder takes a grazing shot, sending a hot jolt of pain coursing down his arm. He grits his teeth, sees the soldier reloading and lunges. They collide, exchanging brutal blows. The soldier slams an armored gauntlet into Ryland's ribs. Ryland retaliates with a savage headbutt. The soldier staggers, giving Ryland the window he needs to ram his carbine into the soldier's chest and pull the trigger. The body collapses. He spins around, adrenaline surging. Sarika is locked in a deadly dance with 2 more adversaries. They've cornered her near a pile of scattered cargo crates, each taking turns driving her back with bursts of gunfire. She deflects and dodges with remarkable agility, her blade scoring glowing arcs in the air. But even her speed has limits, and Ryland sees a final soldier on a catwalk above, aiming at her exposed flank. Ryland sprints, ignoring the screaming pain in his shoulder. His teeth clench. Every instinct demands he do something. He levels his carbine, lines up the shot, and fires. The soldier on the catwalk jolts backward, flipping over the railing with a strangled cry. That distraction is all Sarika needs to eviscerate the last 2 on the ground. Her blade hums, slicing across armor plates and cutting them down in seconds. When the echoes fade, the hangar is silent except for the hum of the overhead lights and the hiss of the ruined cargo loader. Ryland stands there panting, shoulder throbbing, blood dripping down his arm. Sarika catches her breath. The glow on her skin, cycling through frantic colors. She looks to him with an unreadable expression. She notices the injury, steps closer. He just shakes his head and grimaces. "I've had worse." His voice comes out rough, thick with lingering adrenaline. She eyes him a moment longer, possibly checking to see if he's telling the truth or just acting tough. Then her eyes flicker toward the small shuttle. Without speaking, they both move toward it, scanning for additional threats. They clamber aboard the vessel. It's a sleek, single-pilot craft with barely enough room for 2. The interior is tight, the cockpit jammed with alien instrumentation Ryland can't immediately decipher. Sarika slides into the pilot's seat, her long fingers dancing over the controls. Ryland positions himself behind her, scanning for possible pursuit. Outside the cockpit window, He sees the docking bay doors sealed. Another shudder runs through the main ship's structure, indicating the meltdown is accelerating. Sarika's voice is tense. They've locked down the external hatches. I'll have to override from here. She taps several glyphs. Her skin flares bright near her wrists, as if her body is connecting with the craft's systems. Rylan glances over her shoulder, noticing the intricate pattern in her ear ornament glinting in the cockpit's harsh lights. The shape is mesmerizing. He can almost sense her concentration. The entire moment bristles with unspoken intensity. Seconds later, the docking bay doors rumble open, revealing the star-speckled void beyond. Sarika ignites the engines, and the thrusters push them out of the hangar just as the failing ship convulses in a final death rattle. Enormous explosions detonate across its hull, transforming it into a chaos of swirling debris. The shuttle banks sharply. She wrestles with the controls, trying to stabilize them. Ryland's stomach lurches as the craft dips and dives through flaming wreckage. Below them looms a planet's surface, mostly oceanic with scattered landmasses ringed by jagged mountain ranges. It's a swirl of turquoise and deep emerald. The craft's sensors beep ominously, indicating a gravitational pull that's far stronger than standard. Sarika's jaw sets. She pushes the throttle. They break the atmosphere with a bone-rattling shudder, the hull creaking from the atmospheric friction. They crash through cloud cover, skimming across a roiling sea, the engines sputtering. Warning lights flash. Sarika curses in her alien tongue, the purring undertone replaced by a harsh snarl. She steadies the craft as best she can, but they're coming in too fast. The altimeter screaming warnings. Rylan braces behind her, arms locked around the back of the pilot's chair. A final jolt rocks them, and the shuttle tears across a sandy beach, ploughing through a stand of massive, twisted trees before coming to a jarring stop that nearly flings Rylan into the console. For a moment, everything is still except the hiss of overheated machinery. Rylan sucks in a breath, heart hammering. Sarika slumps in the pilot's seat, letting out a trembling exhale. Then she unstraps, stands on unsteady legs. Her luminous skin flickers wildly, the colors unsettled, reflecting her disorientation. Rylan checks the main console. Sparks spit from a damaged panel. The readout is an unreadable alien script, but the gist is clear. The ship is grounded for now. "We need to see if it's safe outside," Rylan says. He shoulders the carbine, ignoring the sting in his arm. Even through the sealed cabin, he can hear the crash of ocean waves. The air is thick, humid. They force the shuttle's hatch open. A rush of briny wind hits them, salty and slightly tinged with something metallic. The sky above is streaked, with deep blues and swirling, copper-hued clouds. The horizon is dotted with volcanic peaks. The beach around them is black sand, and that water is a dark teal, lapping against strange rock formations. Rylan steps onto the sand, scanning the area. There's no immediate sign of hostile life, but that doesn't mean it's safe. He's learned caution the hard way. Sarika emerges behind him, pressing a hand to a bruise on her side. Despite the battered state of both the shuttle and themselves, her eyes are alive with that fierce, shifting color. She seems to be taking it all in, analyzing as he does. He drags a hand through his sweat-damp hair, wincing when his shoulder protests the movement. "We should move away from the crash site," he advises. "We're too exposed here if anyone is tracking us." She nods in agreement, though she doesn't smile. Instead, she checks the power levels on her energy blade. Another flicker pulses across her skin, as though she's recharging it with her own bioelectric aura. The subtle swirling patterns catch Rylan's eye again. They push inland, crossing. Dunes of black volcanic sand. Worn basalt spires jut up, forming a kind of natural barrier. Along the way, Rylan's trained eyes pick out signs of possible local fauna. Footprints, disturbed vegetation, broken shells that might be from large crustacean-like creatures. The entire area brims with unknown dangers. He remains on edge, scanning the horizon with every step. Sarika keeps pace beside him, her movements silent. Occasionally, their arms brush. Each inadvertent contact makes her skin flicker, a phenomenon that draws Ryland's attention whether he likes it or not. He's too practiced at control to let it distract him fully, but he can't deny the primal curiosity that sparks inside him. She glances at him once, catching him looking. Her gaze flicks downward, maybe embarrassed or annoyed, but it's hard to tell. The tension between them has layers: distrust, necessity, and something more carnal that neither wants to admit. Their march continues until they reach a rocky outcropping near a freshwater stream flowing from the mountains. They pause, scanning the area for hostiles or large predators. Finding it temporarily clear, they settle. Ryland collapses onto a flat stone, the weight of the day's fights finally pressing down on him. He tears off a strip of cloth from his gear to wrap his injured shoulder. Sarika watches with that intense gaze, eventually stepping closer as though compelled to assist. She kneels beside him, the black sand shifting beneath her boots. Her slender fingers hover near his wound. He notices a flush of color along the side of her neck, a telltale luminescent glow that betrays her worry. Carefully, she presses her palm to the spot, and there's a sudden, soothing sensation, as if her bioelectric field is stabilizing the torn muscle. He exhales in shaky relief, but the closeness sends an electric jolt through his chest that has nothing to do with healing. For a heartbeat, their eyes meet, and he sees that flicker in her color. She's aware of it too. Then she's gone, stepping back with practiced nonchalance, as if she's scolding herself for letting the contact linger. Ryland repositions himself, ignoring the sudden tightness in his chest. He tries to remain practical. We need to find a safe place for the night, then figure out how to get off this rock. Sarika tilts her head, that purring undertone drifting into her voice. This planet is part of my territory. My people maintain hidden outposts for reconnaissance. If we can reach one, we'll find supplies. She straightens, crossing her arms. You, however, are still an outsider to them. Do you think they'll greet you with open arms? He snorts. I've never gotten a warm welcome anywhere. I'll take my chances. A beat passes. His cynicism meets her guarded resolve. For a moment, sparks of tension fly between them, neither blinking, neither looking away. But there's no time to dwell on it. The day is closing, the sunlight on this alien world shifting to a dim, rust-colored twilight. They gather themselves and move along the stream, following its winding path inland. They travel for hours, crossing rocky plains dotted with alien flora, thick-stemmed plants with spiny leaves that rattle in the breeze. Massive, scaled beasts roam the distance, their calls echoing across the dusk. At one point, Ryland spots a patrol drone overhead, but it's too far away for them to engage. Sarika tightens her grip on her blade, a dark suspicion in her eyes. She mutters something about the drone belonging to an occupation force. He files that information away, certain it will become relevant soon. Night falls, and they find a cliffside hollow partially concealed by creeping vines. Though not entirely safe, it's better than open ground. They settle there. The air is cooler now, the wind carrying faint scents of sulfur and brine from the distant ocean. While Sarika sets a small perimeter alarm using her alien tech, Ryland checks his newly charged carbine. The tension is tangible, as if each is aware of the other's presence in a space too small to contain their warring impulses. Eventually, they share the minimal rations they salvaged. Ryland's arm throbs, but it's functional enough. He can't help noticing how the dim glow of Sarika's skin plays across her angular features. She seems equally aware of the way. His muscles flex beneath the torn fabric of his gear, but neither speaks about it directly. They're too guarded, too raw from the battles. Instead, the conversation drifts to practical matters. How far to the outpost? He asks. 2 days, maybe 3, she answers, explaining in clipped phrases that the planet's shifting magnetic fields can play havoc with navigation. Occasionally, her eyes shift color when she grows animated, as though her entire body is keyed to her emotional state. Rylan dozes in and out of a light sleep, leaning against the rough rock wall. He's attuned to every sound outside, every shift in the wind. Sarika is a silent silhouette near the entrance, her posture alert. Time blurs. Eventually, she settles down enough to rest, and they drift in uneasy proximity. Her presence is impossible to ignore. He senses the subtle hum of her breathing, the way her alien physiology seems to vibrate with every breath, a low-level current that resonates. It gnaws at the edges of his own composure, stirring something instinctual. Dawn arrives with a muted glow filtering through the vines. They pack up quickly, clearing any traces of their shelter. Sarika uses the early light to map a route across a stony ridge that overlooks a wide valley. From their vantage point, Rylan can see plumes of smoke rising from a cluster of structures far in the distance, some kind of settlement. He gestures to it. She shakes her head. Occupied. Not safe. Her tone is clipped, frustration layered under the surface. The occupation forces must be all over this planet. They descend into the valley, winding through labyrinthine canyons. At one juncture, the faint echo of vehicles passing overhead compels them to hide in a cleft in the rock. Once the patrol is gone, they continue. The sun climbs higher, beating down with a punishing heat. Sweat beads across Rylan's forehead, trickling into the creases of his scars. Sarika's skin takes on a glimmering sheen that accentuates her lithe frame, each shifting hue revealing the tension and exertion in her muscles. Around midday, the land changes. Gnarled forests replace the rocky plains, the canopy woven with thick, dark leaves that rustle ominously. The deeper they venture, the more the air seems charged, making Rylan's hair stand on end. My people have used these forests for centuries, Sarika explains quietly. For camouflage and refuge, but we share them with creatures best left undisturbed. As if on cue, a massive shape slithers through the canopy overhead, letting out a guttural hiss. Neither Rylan nor Sarika stops to investigate. They push on, stepping around giant, roots that twist like serpents. Eventually, they come to a clearing at the center of a ring of enormous trees. Sarika signals for silence. She slips ahead to scout, leaving Rylan with only the soft rustle of leaves. He waits, scanning the perimeter, every muscle ready for a fight. It's eerie, being alone in this alien forest. He realizes just how reliant he's become on her knowledge of this terrain. Minutes tick by. Then she returns, expression grim. There's a patrol up ahead, she whispers. Heavily armed. He inhales slowly. We'll go around. She shakes her head. We can't. The ravine to the west is impassable, and the terrain to the east is swarming with watchers. The direct route is the only option, and they're blocking it. A muscle jumps in his jaw. Then we'll hit them. Fast and quiet. She eyes him. They outnumber us. A fierce gleam enters his gaze. They always do. He cracks, his knuckles, that reflexive motion. We don't have a choice. Together, they backtrack slightly, then circle around until they're perched on a low ridge above the patrol. Peering through the thick foliage, Rylan counts at least 8 soldiers. They wear advanced composite armor, better equipped than the ragtag men they fought on the ship. A couple of them are manning a small hovercraft, probably used for scouting. The rest guard a makeshift checkpoint across the only viable passage. Sarika's lips press into a thin line. Rylan can sense the tension radiating from her. She adjusts the settings on her blade, the soft hum intensifying. He steadies his breathing, going into a focus he's honed over years of infiltration and sabotage. The plan is minimal. Cause a diversion, pick them off in the chaos. They move quietly around to a vantage point that puts them behind an outcropping of boulders near the checkpoint. Rylan gathers a few small stones, hurls them into the dense brush on the opposite side, and waits. Sure enough, Two of the soldiers break off to investigate. The moment they pass, he and Sarika strike. Rylan crashes into one guard from behind, slamming an elbow into the nape of his neck. The guard stumbles, and Rylan shoots him point blank. Simultaneously, Sarika pounces on the second guard, her blade a blur of luminescent fury. She dispatches him in seconds, each movement fluid and deadly, but the others are alerted instantly, the hum of the hovercraft igniting as the pilot spots them. Heavy pulse fire peppers the boulders. Fragments of rock explode in deadly shards. Sarika ducks and sprints, using the natural cover to close the distance. Rylan picks off one soldier, who makes the mistake of stepping into the open. The soldier's armor deflects the first shot, but the second shot finds a gap. He goes down with a curse. Two more soldiers converge on Rylan's position. He tosses a grenade, one of the few he salvaged from the ship. The explosion rocks the forest floor, sending up a plume of blackened earth and smoke. Through the haze, he sees Sarika lunging onto the hovercraft. The pilot tries to wheel around, but she slashes through the control console, sparks flying, and it stalls. She dispatches the pilot with a swift backhand slash. Then she leaps off before the craft careens sideways, smashing into a trunk with an explosive impact. Rylan shifts his aim, taking down another soldier who tries to flank Sarika. That soldier's return fire catches Rylan's calf with a grazing burn. He staggers, hissing in pain. The soldier aims again, but Sarika is already on him, whirling, her blade through the soldier's chest plate. One final soldier tries to retreat, racing for the radio pack. Rylan grips his carbine tight, lines up the shot despite his throbbing leg, and fires. The blast catches the soldier in the spine, and he folds with a strangled cry. Again, silence. They stand in a battlefield of broken equipment, smouldering hovercraft remains, and unmoving bodies. Rylan limps, the searing burn in his leg messing with his balance. Sarika notices, rushing to his side. Her skin pulses with an urgent glow, eyes shifting with concern. "Sit," she commands, voice still laced with that subtle purr that resonates in his chest. He sinks down onto a rock, letting her look at the wound. It's a superficial burn, but a painful one. She reaches into a small pouch at her belt, retrieving some kind of salve. She applies it carefully, and he feels a cooling sensation spread along the wound. The tension in his jaw relaxes slightly. He looks at her up close, really looks at her. The swirl of color under her translucent skin is mesmerizing, patterns shifting with her every movement. She focuses on dressing his wound, but he can sense her pulse hammering, see the flicker of light that moves up her throat. Her alien ears twitch, perhaps sensing the closeness of his gaze. He has questions swirling in his mind about how she came to be so adept, about what she truly wants. But he knows better than to press right now. She finishes with the salve, then stands. They share a brief, charged moment, neither speaking. He breaks the silence with a low murmur. "Thanks." She just inclines her head, stepping away. They gather what they can from the fallen soldiers. Ammo, rations, a couple of bandages. Then, as swiftly as they came, they vanish into the forest, leaving behind carnage and severed comm lines. By late afternoon, they reach a hidden path carved into a mountainside. Vines and moss obscure a disguised entrance. With a deft hand, Sarika taps a sequence into a barely visible panel. The rock face shifts, revealing a claustrophobic corridor, lined with faintly glowing crystals. This must be one of her people's outposts. Rylan tenses, uncertain how they'll greet him, a rogue human operative who has no standing with her species. But they proceed inside nonetheless. Two alien guards wait in the corridor, their weapons trained at once. Then they recognize Sarika, though they visibly bristle at Rylan's presence. A short, tense exchange in their own language ensues, Sarika's purring intonation weaving through the words. Rylan gathers that she's vouching for him, though not without reluctance. The guards eventually lower their weapons, clearing a path. Rylan can practically taste their mistrust. The outpost is small, carved out of natural rock, but outfitted with advanced technology. Smooth consoles, humming arcs of power running through crystalline conduits. A handful of Sarika's people bustle in the passages, many wearing light armor reminiscent of hers. Their luminous skin patterns vary in color and intensity, but they all share elongated ears and that predatory grace. Sarika brings Ryland to a briefing chamber where an older member of her species awaits. This elder's skin is a myriad of deep, swirling blues that flash in complicated patterns. He greets Sarika warmly and spares Ryland only the coldest glance. They speak in hushed, urgent tones, referencing a conflict that has escalated. Ryland picks up fragments, expansions of the occupying forces, infiltration squads, the planet's resources being exploited. The elder eventually addresses him in a thickly accented voice. She says you can fight, says you helped her escape. We need fighters, even if they are not of our blood. Ryland meets the elder's gaze. I'm not looking to join an army, he says, voice cool. But I need safe passage off this planet. And Sarika says you might help. He glances at her. She maintains a careful expression, though he detects a flicker of conflicting emotions. The elder looks unimpressed. A soldier who does not fight for a cause is no soldier at all. But if you truly want to leave, we have a mission. Succeed, and we can arrange your departure. Sarika interjects, her tone urgent. We have to retake the central node where communications are jammed. If we fail, the occupation fleet will have total control. He can help, she insists, though she doesn't sound thrilled about it. He's proven himself capable. She glances at Rylan. He also owes me for patching him up. Rylan exhales a low chuckle, though there's no humor in it. Fine, he agrees. Point me at the target. What follows is a terse planning session. A holomap flickers in midair, highlighting a massive communications tower on the eastern continent. The occupant forces have seized it, using it to jam signals and coordinate their expansions. The tower is heavily guarded. They'll need a stealth approach to slip in, sabotage the core, and disable the jamming array. Then the outpost can call for reinforcements, or enact whatever final plan they have. The elder's gaze lands on Rylan like a weight. This is your only chance. Succeed, and we will help you leave. Fail, and you die with the rest of us. Rylan doesn't flinch. I've never failed a mission I accepted. They finalize the plan quickly. Sarika leads Rylan to a small armory, chamber to gear up. While she rummages for replacement power cells, Rylan glances around at the alien weaponry. Sleek, intricate designs that hum with unfamiliar energies. He finds something akin to a sidearm that fits his grip, sliding it into his holster. He's aware of Sarika's presence behind him. The tension in the air is thick as they pack. She moves closer, pressing an additional energy pack into his hands. Their fingers brush. A flare of color pulses down her arm. He feels that low hum in his chest again, like a silent thunder. He mutters a gruff, "Thanks." She nods, eyes averting. Then, clearing her throat, she leads him out. They push through the outpost corridors until they reach an exit on the far side of the mountain. The mission is set for dawn, giving them just enough time to travel under cover of darkness to the tower's location. They depart, leaving behind suspicious stares from the alien guards. The night air bites at Rylan's skin, carrying a faint metallic tang. Sarika guides them across rugged terrain, her footwork sure and silent. Even with her navigational skill, it's a treacherous trek. Massive boulders line the path, and steep cliffs loom. Twice, they have to scramble around patrol beacons that cast sweeping searchlights across the terrain. The second time, they huddle behind a rock, close enough that he can see the flutter of her pulse at her neck. He exhales slowly, the tension between them a near tangible force. They move on. Hours blur. Eventually, the tower comes into sight, its spire piercing the sky with blinking red lights. The base is ringed with a perimeter fence, sensor arrays, and squads of heavily armed troopers. Rylan's jaw tightens. This is a fortress. They find a vantage point on a rise overlooking the installation, picking out guard patrols and scanning for weaknesses. Sarika's infiltration background comes to the fore, pointing out the best approach. We'll slip past the fence at the north end. There's a blind spot with the sensors due to that outcropping. She points to a cluster of rocks. Then we scale the tower's maintenance shaft along the eastern side. The jamming array is near the top. He nods, adrenaline already stirring. They wait for the shift change near dawn, when the guards are groggy. Then they descend the slope, hugging shadows. They reach the perimeter fence unobserved. Sarika's multi-tool zaps through the power feed, letting them slip inside. Step by painstaking step, they evade searchlights, flattening themselves against structures as patrols pass. At the base of the tower, Rylan stands watch, while Sarika carefully bypasses a control panel. A hiss signals the unlocking of the maintenance hatch. He keeps an eye on the distant movement of troopers, hand on his sidearm. Once inside, they climb a narrow ladder that runs the tower's interior. The walls vibrate with the hum of power lines feeding the jamming equipment. They make it nearly halfway up before alarms start blaring. Something must have tripped an unnoticed sensor. No time for stealth now. They push upward, climbing as the tower quakes with the sound of boots pounding on metal rungs. Rylan sees flashing. Lights below. A trooper stepping into the ladder shaft, raising a weapon. Rylan fires downward in short, controlled bursts. The trooper's body tumbles into the darkness. Above, another trooper tries to peer over the railing. Sarika hurls, a small disc that explodes in a silent flash, sending the guard plummeting. They emerge onto a narrow maintenance platform. A single door leads into the tower's central array. Sarika slices into the door controls with her blade, forcing it open. The interior is a tangle of cables, consoles, and a massive generator, thrumming with enough energy to fry them both if they make a wrong move. They step in cautiously, scanning for hostiles. Rylan spots a pair of engineers at the far end. One yells in alarm, reaching for a sidearm. Rylan doesn't hesitate. 2 shots ring out, dropping them. Sarika rushes to the primary console, hooking up a device from her belt. Her skin crackles with faint arcs of blue, intensifying the device's hacking sequence. Meanwhile, the door behind them slides open, and a squad of heavily armed troops floods in. Rylan drops behind a console for cover, returning fire. The pulses streak overhead in a hail of heated plasma. Some shots bounce off the generator casing, making it spark dangerously. He grits his teeth, pinning down the troopers with suppressive fire. "Whatever you're doing, do it faster," he barks over his shoulder. Sarika hisses a curse in her native tongue, pushing more energy into the hack. Alarms scream, the entire tower trembling. The troopers press closer, using a row of storage cylinders as partial cover. Rylan tosses another grenade, but it only forces them back momentarily. They reorganize, unleashing volley after volley. A stray bolt scorches across Rylan's armor, nearly knocking the wind out of him. Gasping, he ducks lower, reloading with shaking hands. He glances at Sarika. She's trembling with the strain of interfacing her own bioelectric field with the tower's system. Sweat drips down her face, her luminous patterns flashing in erratic pulses. Her expression is set in grim determination. More troopers pour in, and Rylan realizes they're seconds from being overwhelmed. He spots a power conduit overhead. If he can sever it, it might short-circuit the entire array temporarily, creating an opening. "Cover me!" he yells, swinging himself onto a metal beam. He dangles precariously above the generator, firing downward to keep the troopers back. But one of them notices him, aiming a rifle. Rylan braces for the shot he can't avoid. Right then, Sarika lets out a sudden, piercing vocalization that resonates through the chamber. The trooper freezes, stunned by the purring undertone cranked to a debilitating frequency. Rylan seizes the moment, hooking his leg around the beam and leveling his carbine at the conduit. A single pulse shot blasts it, causing a shower of sparks. The entire chamber flickers, consoles going haywire. The jamming device hums dangerously, out of sync. Sarika seizes that flicker of power. She slams a final command into the console. A high-pitched whine resonates through the tower. Then, everything goes dark for a moment, except for the emergency lights. The troopers below curse in confusion, their gear momentarily malfunctioning. Sarika staggers, stumbling away from the console. Rylan drops back down, ignoring the jolt of pain in his leg. He takes her arm, a jolt of static passing between them. "We have to move!" They bolt for a side exit, leaving the troopers fumbling in the partial darkness. Sarika throws one last sabotage device into the generator's core. They race down a secondary corridor. Behind them, the generator groans, energy swirling chaotically. An explosion rips through the tower, shaking the foundations. Rylan and Sarika barely make it out onto an outside scaffold before the corridor caves in behind them. They cling to the railing as the entire tower goes up in sparks, flames curling, into the early morning sky. Once on stable ground, they hurry through the perimeter fence, which is now offline. Outside, the alien outpost's infiltration team must have been waiting for the jamming to drop, because Rylan spots incoming crafts overhead, a sign that Sarika's people are moving in for an offensive. They sprint into the covering forest, putting distance between themselves and the tower. The ground quakes as sections of it collapse. Finally, they pause in a dense thicket. Their chests heave in unison. Rylan's injuries throb, a burning reminder of the cost. Sarika wavers, leaning against a tree, that purring resonance in her breath. Her entire body glows erratically, a sign that she's been pushing her alien physiology to the limit. Rylan steadies her, one hand at her waist. She doesn't pull away. Instead, she lets out a low, tremulous exhale. He can feel the heat of her skin through his glove, the shimmering patterns dancing under his touch. They're both alive, both riding the high of survival and victory. Adrenaline pulses, drowning out the pain. Her gaze lifts, meeting his. He feels the thick tension crackling between them. The brush with death intensifies everything. The pounding hearts, the ragged breaths. Her eyes shift to a deep, smouldering shade. He sees color racing up her neck. Neither has to speak to acknowledge the raw pull of attraction that's been building, fueled by each brush with danger. It feels unstoppable. He grips her waist more firmly. She releases a sharp breath, half-lidded eyes narrowing. Their faces are close enough for him to see the fine lines of her ears, the shimmer of her parted lips. They hesitate for a split second, a moment of mutual challenge. Then he crushes his mouth to hers with bruising urgency. She responds with a sound that's half groan, half purr. The taste of salt, blood, and adrenaline mingles between them. Her arms loop around his neck, nails grazing his skin, and he presses her back against the gnarled bark of the tree. There's no softness, just an explosion of tension unleashed. The forest around them seems to vanish, replaced by the heat of their bodies. Her skin's luminescence flares, matching the frantic pace of their heartbeats. He slides a hand up her thigh, feeling the taut muscle there. The sensation of her alien physiology under his touch is electric, literally. Tiny sparks dance along her limbs. She meets his aggression with her own. Her blade clatters to the ground, forgotten, and she yanks his combat vest aside. The sting in his shoulder intensifies, but it only heightens the urgency. Her lips trail along his jaw, that purring resonance vibrating through his veins. She nips at his neck, the subtle edge of her teeth drawing a soft gasp from him. He grasps her hips, pulling her tight against him. They rock together, a collision of raw need and pent-up frustration, tongues meeting with a fierce hunger that threatens to consume them both. Their breathing grows ragged, bodies straining. She fumbles with the clasps of his gear, and he tears at the fastenings of her combat suit. The minimal armor plates clatter to the ground. The swirling colors of her skin intensify as his hands explore the curves of her waist, the sweep of her torso. He can sense her responding beneath his fingers, pulses of shifting blue and purple chasing each other across her body. Her voice trembles with a heightened frequency that makes his skin prickle. Every moment is a heady rush of danger and desire. Her hands roam over his scar-laced chest, delving into the ridges and plains hardened by countless fights. She moans, softly, the sound breathless and urgent, responding to his every touch. He crushes his lips to hers again, devouring her mouth, losing himself in the surge of sensations. They slip from the rough bark to the mossy ground, each movement a desperate, clumsy attempt to get closer. She arches, pressing up against him, the friction sending sparks of static through the air. His hands slide across her thighs, pushing aside the last barriers of fabric. She responds with a hiss of satisfaction, the color in her eyes flaring bright. Their bodies align, a frantic press of heated flesh. She lets out a low, trembling sound that vibrates through his core. It's like every nerve is supercharged. He grips her tighter, his mouth tracing the curve of her neck, feeling the pulse beneath that glowing skin. She moans his name, low, husky, a near feral whisper. It sets his blood aflame. They move together in a near frenzy, the intensity of life or death closeness fueling their rhythm. There's no gentle lead-up, no slow unveiling of emotion. It's all raw, primal collision, a reflection of the violence and adrenaline that have defined their every moment together. Her nails dig into his shoulders. Pain mingles with pleasure, a reminder of his injuries, but also a surge of heightened awareness. He groans against her ear, feeling her hips shift, guiding him deeper. Her voice resonates in his head, that subaudible purr intensifying, drawing him into her alien cadence. Everything narrows to the pounding of their hearts, the friction of skin on skin, the ragged edge of breath. His mouth finds hers again, stifling a cry as they crest together, an abrupt surge that leaves them both trembling and clutching at the other. For a long, breathless moment, they stay locked together, foreheads touching, bodies slick with sweat and faint luminescence. Their hearts thud in chaotic unison. The forest stands silent around them, as though every living thing is holding its breath. It's a moment carved out of chaos, where they both cling to the raw proof that they're alive. Eventually, reality seeps back in. They peel apart, each sporting new bruises and red marks. Neither looks away. Their gazes lock, acknowledging that something fundamental has changed. The distrust and friction remain, but now there's also the undeniable memory of shared desire. He brushes a thumb over the glow at her cheek. She exhales softly, eyes half-lidded, still shifting with that alien hue, but then she stiffens, as if remembering the precariousness of their situation. They don't speak about what just happened. Instead, they gather themselves, adjusting clothing, picking up weapons. Sarika's face is flushed, those patterns still flickering, but she keeps her voice steady. "We need to move. The tower is down, but the occupation forces won't let that stand for long." He nods, swallowing hard. His mind is a storm of conflicting thoughts, but the mission remains. Survival remains. He extends a hand to help her up. She takes it hesitantly, letting him pull her to her feet. They lean on each other as they trudge deeper into the forest. Every step aches, but they push forward, compelled by an unspoken determination that's grown stronger with the physical bond they've forged. It takes them the better part of the day to circle back toward the outpost. Along the way, they see signs that the planet's defenders are taking advantage of the newly open communications. Small pockets of resistance launch ambushes on occupation convoys. They spot smoke on the horizon, likely from ongoing skirmishes. The entire planet feels like it's shifting, pivoting on the sabotage they accomplished at the tower. Rylan and Sarika move carefully, avoiding large concentrations of troops. At dusk, they reach the hidden entrance on the mountain. A different set of guards greets them. This time they seem more accepting, perhaps because word has spread that the tower jamming has been neutralized. They step through the outpost corridors, battered and stained with dust and blood, yet nobody questions them. Whispers of success drift behind them. Someone calls Sarika's name reverently. They find the elder in the briefing chamber, conferring with several officers. He turns as they enter, eyes falling first on Sarika, then on Rylan. There's a moment of profound relief in the swirling patterns along the elder's skin. "You did it," he says. "Communications are open. Our allies have arrived in orbit. The occupation is in disarray. Sarika steps forward, posture straight. We need to press the advantage. Now is our best chance to strike at the capital command. They'll be vulnerable without the tower. The elder nods slowly. Indeed. We will coordinate from here. His gaze shifts to Rylan. And you, human, will you stay and finish this war? Or claim your departure now that your part is done? Rylan feels Sarika's eyes on him, a subtle tension in her stance. He recalls their deal. Sabotage the tower in exchange for safe passage. By all rights, he could leave. But he remembers the press of her body against his, the taste of her lips, the way she fought by his side. He thinks of how this occupation has systematically crushed her people. He's not the type to fight someone else's war lightly, yet something in him resists walking away. He grinds his teeth thinking it through, then he answers in that low growl that brooks no argument. We finish what we start. I'll help. But when this is over, I want out. A fleeting expression crosses Sarika's face, something unreadable. Then she nods. The elder regards him with something like grudging respect. We can use every blade. Gather what you need, both of you. We strike within the hour. They leave the briefing chamber. Rylan's exhaustion weighs heavy. There's no time to rest, no time to process the maelstrom of emotions. They pass through the outpost corridors until they reach a small alcove used for medical triage. Sarika insists on checking his wounds properly, especially the scorched burn on his shoulder. He lets her lead him to a makeshift cot. A medic appears, but Sarika waves them away, opting to handle it herself. She unwinds the old bandages, applies a salve that stings. Then the soothing warmth begins to spread. Her movements are slow, almost careful. He studies her face in the pale glow. Tension lines bracket her mouth. He notices the smudges of dust and faint bruising on her temple. A wave of protectiveness surges in him, surprising in its intensity. He tentatively places a hand on her hip. She glances at him, eyes flicking from that wariness to something softer. The moment hovers, balanced between raw memory and immediate danger. Before either can speak, an outpost officer pokes their head in, summoning them to the hangar. The upcoming strike is happening sooner than planned, an urgent matter. They exchange a look, a silent acknowledgement that whatever personal words they might have shared will have to wait. They gear up, stepping into the outpost's subterranean hangar, where a small fleet of alien skimmers is being readied for battle. A hush falls as they enter. Dozens of Sarika's people glance their way. Some stare with uncertainty, others with respect. Rylan ignores it, checking the carbine, ensuring it's fully charged. Sarika slips on a fresh suit of gear, sleek, dark material that fits her curves like a second skin, revealing the subtle glow of her bioluminescence in faint pulses beneath. Rylan tries not to focus on the memory of how that skin felt beneath his hands. They board one of the skimmers. The craft is open-topped, designed for rapid deployment with minimal shielding. Sarika takes the controls. Rylan stands behind, her bracing against the swirling air as the skimmer lifts off, gliding out of the hangar into the twilight sky. Several other skimmers follow in formation. Above them, faint lights from Allied ships glimmer in orbit, an unspoken promise of reinforcements. They speed across the planet's surface, covering ground at a breathtaking pace. Below, columns of smoke mark the front lines. The capital command facility looms in the distance, a sprawling fortress of metal spires and energy shields. Anti-aircraft, batteries dot the perimeter. Rylan's gut churns at the size of it. We're hitting that place head-on, he yells over the roar of the engines. Sarika's expression hardens. We have no choice. Cutting the head off the occupation is the only way to ensure our victory. If we let them regroup, they'll bring reinforcements from off-world. The skimmer formation fans out as they approach. Alarms flare, searchlights stabbing the sky. Anti-air turrets begin tracking them. Sarika swerves, weaving between incoming fire. Adrenaline spikes again. Rylan grabs the mounted turret on their skimmer, returning suppressive fire at the fortress's battlements. Explosions light the night in rapid succession. Other skimmers join the assault, some diving straight for the fortress gates, unleashing troops who scramble under the protective arcs of allied gunners. Ryland's hearing is soon overwhelmed by the roar of artillery. Sarika swoops low, depositing them on a landing platform near the fortress's eastern flank. As they disembark, the platform quakes under relentless shelling from both sides. The air is thick with smoke and the stench of ozone. Rylan and Sarika sprint across the platform, returning fire at squads of troopers. They force an entry hatch open, leading into the labyrinthine corridors of the command center. The plan is to locate the central command dais and disable the fortress shield, paving the way for a final takeover. Inside, the corridors ring with alarms. They press on, fighting squads of heavily armored enforcers. The fighting is brutal, each corner a potential ambush. Ryland's knuckles split open from the sheer force of repeated impacts. Sarika's blade flickers and hums, scything down more troopers than Ryland can count. They forge a path through, the carnage always pushing forward. Eventually, they breach a high-security door leading to a massive command chamber. Thick cables snake across the floor, feeding an imposing console ringed by hollow displays. The occupant commander stands at the center, barking orders to a retinue of elite guards. As soon as Rylan and Sarika enter, the commander spins, features twisted with rage. Shouts fill the air. The retinue forms a defensive perimeter, weapons locked and loaded. Rylan snarls, leveling his carbine. Sarika channels her last reserves, focusing that purring undertone to disrupt the enemy's coordination. A wave of sonic resonance washes over the chamber, staggering some guards. Rylan opens fire. The room explodes into chaos. Pulse beams, scorching across consoles, sparks raining down from shattered displays. Bodies hit the floor. One guard manages to clip Sarika's side, drawing a pained cry from her. Rylan barrels into him, snapping his neck with a vicious twist. Another guard tries to slash at him with an energy pike, but Rylan ducks, firing point blank into the guard's unprotected torso. They close in on the commander, who stands before the main console, desperately inputting commands to raise the fortress's secondary shields. Sarika slashes the console, sending arcs of electricity everywhere. The commander screeches in fury, drawing a sidearm. She fires at Sarika, but Rylan lunges in, slamming the weapon aside. The commander and Rylan tumble across the floor, exchanging punishing blows. She's strong, aided by some exoskeleton armor. She pins Rylan momentarily, pressing a forearm to his throat. Spots dance in his vision. Sarika lunges, delivering a precise slash that severs the commander's exoskeletal brace. The commander howls, swinging wildly. Rylan grips her wrist, forcing it backward. There's a sickening crunch. She collapses with a pained groan. He finishes her with a single shot, the bolt searing through her chest. Smoke curls from the wound. Panting, Rylan staggers to his feet, looking around. Alarms still blare. Sarika grips her side, limping. He rushes to steady her. She points to a central power coupler. We shut it down. The fortress shields drop. Our forces can overwhelm them. He nods, quickly yanking out cables. The entire console flickers. Sarika plunges her blade into the coupler, channeling a final surge of energy. With a sputtering hum, the lights fade and alarms die. Then a massive energy fluctuation pulses through the fortress. The shields outside spark and vanish. A triumphant roar from the Allied fighters echoes in the distance. The fortress is exposed. Rylan and Sarika brace against each other, battered, but alive. Through the shattered windows, they see Allied skimmers pouring in. The fortress courtyard is soon awash in the Resistance's surge. Occupation forces crumble, their chain of command decapitated. Another wave of relief hits. But Rylan can't relax. Not yet. Troops from the outpost flood into the command chamber, securing it. The Elder appears, leaning on a staff, skin swirling with victory colors. He surveys the carnage, then his gaze settles on them. "It's done," he says, voice echoing in the high ceilings. The fortress is ours, and the planet's freedom is within reach. Sarika almost smiles, exhaustion carving lines into her face. She looks to Rylan. He steadies her, aware of her wound. The elder beckons for medics. They swarm in, beginning triage on the wounded. Rylan and Sarika step aside, letting them handle the others. For a moment, the swirling chaos seems distant. They stand there, adrenaline waning, the magnitude of what they accomplished sinking in. The elder nods at Rylan. You have fulfilled your part of the bargain. This planet owes you a debt. Rylan inclines his head, then glances at Sarika. She meets his gaze, her eyes flickering softly. We'll grant you safe passage on the next outgoing vessel, the elder continues. It should depart once we've secured the last pockets of resistance. For a heartbeat, neither Sarika nor Rylan speak. The entire war-torn chamber feels suffused with an undercurrent, a question about what comes next. Rylan senses the finality in the elder's words. He has what he fought for, the chance to leave, to vanish back into the galaxy. He turns to Sarika, the memory of her lips still burning against his. They've shared more than battles now, bound by an undeniable link, yet parted by their worlds and allegiances. She nods slowly, an acceptance that holds a trace of sadness. It's what we agreed. The slight quiver in her purring voice betrays a swirl of conflicting emotions. She lifts her chin, determined not to let it show. He breathes out, feels the ache in his ribs, the tension in his battered body, and the sharper ache in his chest. Right, he mutters. He wants to say more, but words fail him. All the fights, all the near-death experiences, the raw collision of their bodies in that forest clearing, it's boiled down to this: leaving, after winning a war that was never technically his. The rest of the day blurs. The fortress is consolidated under Sarika's people. Reports flood in. The occupation forces are in full retreat. Allied ships arrive overhead, bringing relief and supplies. Rylan helps in small ways, redirecting wounded, offering tips on securing vantage points. Sarika is whisked away for medical, treatment, and briefing. He only catches glimpses of her, each time feeling that electric pull. Finally, near dusk, Rylan stands on a tarmac where a sleek starship is preparing for liftoff. The ramp is down. A bored-looking alien attendant checks. Manifests, this is it. He can vanish, go back to drifting through the galaxy. Maybe slip into another war, another betrayal. Yet the idea knots his stomach in a way it never has before. He feels a presence behind him. Turning, he sees Sarika. She's wrapped in, a light bandage across her ribcage, but otherwise stands tall. A subtle glow plays along her features. For a moment, neither speaks. Then she steps closer, her voice quiet enough that only he can hear, though it still has that sultry resonance. So, you're going. He nods. A deal's a deal. He tries to keep it light, but fails. She studies him, her eyes shifting color, reflecting a swirl of emotions. He wants to say something about how she's changed him, how he's discovered a reason to fight beyond survival. But the words stick in his throat. Instead, he manages a ragged whisper. You could come with me. She looks away briefly, arms crossing. This is my planet. My people need me. I have a duty to rebuild, protect them from any future threat. I can't just leave. Her eyes flick back to him, shimmering with a deep violet hue. But she hesitates, stepping closer until she's nearly pressed against him. The tension crackles again, reminiscent of the forest floor. But I won't forget what happened between us. His heart pounds. He lifts a hand, gently cupping her cheek. She leans into it for just a moment, her skin glowing beneath his touch. They share a final kiss, not as frantic as before, but still laced with that dangerous edge. She breathes out, her voice trembling. You will always have a place here, if you're willing to pay the price. He gives a wry half smile, the corner of his mouth quirking up. That price being... Her eyes blaze in that intense color. More battles, more dangers, more nights that might end with us just as bruised. A faint smirk crosses her lips. And maybe that's what we both need. They linger in that moment. Then the starship's engines roar to life. The attendant calls for boarding. Rylan exhales, stepping back. He notes the fleeting warmth where her body touched his. "I guess this is goodbye for now," he says. She lowers her gaze, but her posture remains defiant, strong. For now. Without another word, Rylan turns and boards the ship. The ramp seals behind him. Through a viewport, he sees her figure on the tarmac, arms folded, hair swaying in the wind, luminous patterns dancing along her skin. It's a sight that etches itself into his mind. The starship lifts off, engines churning, carrying him away from the war-torn planet where he found something unexpected, a bond forged in blood, adrenaline, and raw passion. He stands at that viewport, watching until she's no more than a speck in the distance. The fight is over, for now. But in his chest, something stirs that won't let him rest. He knows he's leaving behind more than just a battlefield. He's leaving behind part of himself, the part that learned to care. Again, as the starship breaks atmosphere and slips into the star-studded void, he closes his eyes, letting the memory of her skin, her voice, and the fierce contact of their bodies fuel an ache that is somehow both painful and exhilarating. He doesn't know when or how, but something tells him he'll be back, because some wars are worth the price, and some battles never truly end.